Good afternoon. I'm very grateful to be here. Also, thank you, Akil, for the talk, Bridging the Divide. Because today I want you to meet Mappy, Happy, and Dappy. They're obviously fictional characters, but they're going to help me tell the story. I'm Ben. I'm a tech guy, but I'm going to try to talk to you about web development today. And so, was it on? Yeah. Now it's still on? This is a bit better. So I'm literally bridging the divide because I've been for 5 years now building decentralized software. And over those 5 years, I've learned one lesson, and that's a lesson I want to share with you here today. And with it, also tell the story. So for now, just remember these characters, and I'll come back to them later. So actually, 5 years ago, I was here in Paris, 2014, and I gave my first presentation on decentralized software that we built. And ever since, this is what it comes down to. As technologies, we focus on our technology. We think about our cute, adorable puppy. We love it. It deserves all the attention. But we very often ignore the box. We don't consider how we're shipping the technology, what we're building. And if we don't address that problem, if we don't look at how we're getting our technology in the hands of end users, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we're building for ourselves if we're not building for end users. And what do we want to build? I'll take a bit of liberty and I'll say that we're all wanting to build a decentralized internet in this room. That might take different forms of what that means or which values we stand for. But what we will all agree on is we need to put keys in the hands of people. And if we're serious about this, we need to put keys in the hands of millions of people. And so one approach is to consider how do we put Ethereum inside mainstream applications. Because by definition, mainstream applications already have users. But then how do we get there? How do we go from where we are today to where we would want to be? And so that's where I will want to introduce my three little characters. We talk a lot about dApps, decentralized applications, but what about mainstream applications, maps or mappies? And is there a variant of hybrid applications that sit in the middle? And while these characters are maybe fictional, what is really important is that when you're having discussions about what to build and how to build it, they help you fine-tune the story. Because otherwise, again, we're building for ourselves, we're not building for the end user. And so Mappy, or a mainstream application, it's an application that already serves a purpose. It has tens of millions of users, maybe hundreds of millions of users, and these users use that application for a specific purpose. They come back to it, and that's why they use that application, whichever it is. The developers of that application, they themselves also have a very direct interest. They want to increase user engagement of their application. And so one way that they can increase the user engagement with the application is by increasing trust, by increasing transparency. And so there are a lot of mainstream applications that are very much interested in looking at how they can tokenize the value that users create within that application, but that's not their core focus. The core focus of these developers is to improve the experience of their application. They don't have the time or the focus to look at writing Solidity smart contracts, rebuilding Infura, all these things they shouldn't be doing. That's our job. And that's also the message of my talk. We should make it our job. So if we have Mappies, we can also consider hybrid applications, Happies. And so they already exist also. If you think of wallet companies, they're not the traditional company because the core logic of their service is already decentralized. There's still some backend that helps surface the application, but at the end of the day, I can take my tokens out of a wallet that I don't like, I move it to another one. And so they're already deeper down the road towards a decentralized application. And then, of course, we all want to build decentralized applications, but we have to be honest that today we cannot build that. We cannot build an actual mass use application as a decentralized application. And so with these three characters, I want to emphasize that we can sharpen our discussions of how we build and what we build to really get to mass adoption. But then if we go back to Mappy, right? Mappy has developers. And so Mappy has developers and Mappy has end users. And if we want to build for them, we need a way to answer what it is they want. And so one framework that I can really recommend is the jobs to be done framework. It's as simple as it sounds, but everyone has a job to be done. It might be a functional job, it might be an emotional job, it might be a societal job. So for example, if I have a dinner date and I'm running late, I still want to be arriving on time. So I will pull out my app and I will hail a taxi ride with the click of a button because that gets my job done. My job is at that point getting to my location on time. And so in general, a good application gets me where I need to go. It fulfills my job, whether that's functional, emotional, like Netflix fulfills a lot of our emotional needs, or societal. It's a really helpful way to think about things. But also app developers, everyone has a job to get done. Their job is to improve user engagement with their application. And so that brings me to a pilot that we're launching. One mainstream application that we're working with is Hornet. It's a gay social network. They have 25 million registered users, and soon they're on Ethereum mainnet. And their end users are already using this application with a purpose. They already have a job to get done. They're there to chat with people, meet people, socialize. We shouldn't get in their way. They don't want to open Hornet to learn about crypto, back up their 12 words. That's really not going to fly. But we do want to educate. So with Hornet, they already have internal community points that are just points within the application. And so they're now becoming Ethereum-backed LGBT tokens. And so we want to educate both the users that they're going to have now tokens that are externally valuable. And LGBT token by itself is also an education project. It's to raise awareness for the LGBT community. And so when these users open their app, when it updates, they will see that they can claim their LGBT tokens. And so we want to educate, but we don't want to ask too much. And we know that 6-digit pins work. Apple has tested this. Almost all phones right now lock and unlock with 6-digit pins. People can remember 6-digit pins. And so when we want to create their wallet, we ask them to create or give a 6-digit pin and to absolutely not forget it, because then they've lost access to their wallet. People get this. And so the end users have a job to get done, and we don't want to interfere with that and help solve it. But also the developers of Hornet have a job to get done. They, like we said, they want to tokenize, but they don't have the time or the focus. It's also not their job to learn Ethereum. And so how we solve for that is by building or have built a wallet SDK. So it's an iOS, Android SDK that manages Etherless keys. So for the end user on the left, you can see it just looks as if he has a wallet inside the application. And also the app developer doesn't have to learn Ethereum or get under the hood of things. And the way that we solve for that is by riding on this concept of Etherless keys. Because now we can define different types of keys that the SDK can manage that serve different functions. And I do, because I'm a tech guy, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. So we deploy 3 contracts for each user. Some of you may know Gnosis. So we have a multi-sig contract from Gnosis Safe that we use to control the ownership of the account. Then we have an agent contract that the user can use to act within the economy. We call it a token holder account because it holds the tokens. And we have a third contract, delayed recovery contract. And so each device gets a device key. It's managed by the Safe Gnosis contract. And it's the main owner. It owns the token holder contract itself. And that contract manages session keys. And so session keys are something that we've had to introduce because, again, when the user is using this application, we don't want to interrupt the experience that he's having. No mainstream application is going to adopt Ethereum if they're forced to break or reduce their user experience. They might still be interested in it, but they're not going to roll it out if it reduces their user experience. And so for that reason, we have session keys, because with the session keys, the user can authorize once a session by entering a PIN, and then the device key is unlocked from the secure enclave, and we can authorize a session key that now has spending limits, automatically expires on the contract, and also when the user logs out, all the session keys are deactivated. And so this contract actually holds the user's tokens. So when he's acting in the app, when he's liking something or giving someone tokens, LGBT tokens, then that actually happens through executable transactions signed by these session keys. And lastly, there's a unique recovery key. And this one is associated with this recovery contract, which will allow the user to initiate the recovery and to enter a new device key if he has lost access to the wallet. And because the space is very new, explicitly the executable transactions, we actually have here 3 types executable transactions. So Gnosis has their own safe transaction that's then used for the device keys. In our case, the use of EIP 1077, which was the executable transactions, really started the meta transactions movement, isn't the most gas efficient choice we've made, but we definitely want to support the community standard and standardization. So what we'll learn, we can now put back into the discussion around EIP 1077. And then for the recovery key, it's not really a transaction. It's sufficient to sign structured data, and so that's why we use EIP 712, which is a great EIP, by the way. And because we have these executable transactions, now we can build a relayer service. The SDK can sign executable transactions, and we can relay them to Ethereum mainnet. However, that doesn't work because Ethereum mainnet does not have the capacity for that many users. So we also have to build a layer 2 scaling solution on top of Ethereum mainnet. But ta-da! All this work gives us tokens inside an application that the user didn't have to lose the experience around or learn something that was unusual to him. To maybe Akhil's point also, because of the Etherless keys, the company here, Hornet, is responsible for paying the gas prices. So rather than charging the user, it's the company who is charged for the gas prices within the application. But then apps get uninstalled and keys get lost. And so, yes, we should write down 12 words, and yes, we should have multiple devices, but most people won't. And I am a fervent, it should always be possible to write down your 12 words, but if we insist to a mainstream application that they have to, at early or later stage, write down the 12 words, no mainstream application is ever going to accept that in their UI, because users won't like it, and no mainstream application is going to sacrifice a decrease in user experience just for the sake of our vision of a new internet. So we have to do better. It's our job. And so again, if we don't solve for distribution, it doesn't matter what we build. If we don't scale out, we can't scale out if we don't solve for the distribution project. And so when you remember, we created the user wallet with a 6-digit PIN. And so a 6-digit PIN, you will all know, is not a recovery key. You can't generate a key from a 6-digit PIN. We need more entropy. But here we have a unique situation because we have two entities already. We have the application itself, and we have a relayer service. Both of them can store an entropy-rich secret to help to send to the user SDK when the user wants to recover, and that combined with the PIN gives us now an entropy-rich recovery key. But it can be brute force. It can be brute force if the parties would collude, or if an attacker manages to breach both the application and the relayer service. This is a problem still. But that's where we need Ethereum, because with a smart contract on Ethereum, we can enforce a delay on that recovery. So even if the recovery is signed by the valid recovery signature and by the valid relayer, then still the smart contract will enforce. In this case, we're using 12 hours before that recovery can actually be initiated. And within that 12 hours, we can notify the user. The same way when you travel and you log into Gmail, you get a notification, was this you trying to log in? We can now notify the user and ask, is this you who wants to recover the wallet? If that's not the case, we can abort it, pause it. If there's any suspicious behavior, we can pause it or abort. The user can or the relayer can. Yeah, so in more detail, but that gives us 3 options, right? So we're not excluding 12 words by far, but we can't make that a requirement. And an additional very likely path that we see is that users will get a new phone. And with that new phone, they can carry over their wallet just by authorizing it with the old phone. The only thing they now have to do is scan a QR code because we have the multi-sig to manage multiple devices. But then very importantly, as the main meat of this talk is, we should be able to recover from a 6-digit PIN, and we now can. And so bringing it back, right? So these 3 characters, they've been very helpful for us over the past year and a half to solve these problems, because we started from that additional question, what part of the technology is missing to put Ethereum inside mainstream applications? And as we tried to solve that question, we saw we had to build all 3 of these little characters, because we have the end users who already want to use the mainstream application, and we can't reduce their user experience. Then we have the developers of that mainstream application that we need to cater for. It's our job to make it possible for them to integrate it. It's not their job. In order to talk from an SDK effectively to Ethereum, we need relayer services, and this is a hybrid application. So OST Kit that we've built is a hybrid application. It provides an API where the SDK can call to, but it only takes executable transactions. So the core of the logic is already decentralized on chain. We can't cheat. But then Ethereum is where it is today, so we also had to build a layer 2 scaling solution, but that's a different talk. We've talked about this also at different locations. And so, yeah, thank you. I hope that this, the introduction of MAPI, Happy and Dappy, really help us as a community move forward. Because if we keep talking about this broad concept of decentralized internet, it's not specific enough to solve the problems that we need to start solving. And so this is what we've learned. I hope it's helpful. I'm very much interested in carrying the conversation forward. Thanks. Any questions? There's questions?
What feedback did you get from the users? Did you see a raise on the awareness of the blockchain, Ethereum, after the experiment?
So disclaimer, there was a soon. So we're ramping up now to launch this on mainnet, and that is a rollout. So that's the first pilot we have. We have multiple in the pipeline because we're a technology provider to these partners. We're second half of this year. Our own deadline is a little bit earlier. The rollout will be to their super users first. For example, they have a set of beta users, that's 3,000 people. Then the wider community that actively contributes, translations of articles, etc. That's then 5,000 people. So we will keep rolling this out in gradual stages. And definitely we're very happy to, I mean, obviously we will want to relay all the learnings that we get from that. But that's a lot of real life users on Ethereum mainnet newly introduced. So yeah, expect that later this year.
Thank you very much for the great presentation. Could you please elaborate more on what value does this bring to the Hornet application? Like, what do they get from, what the users of the Hornet application get from the fact that they will be on Ethereum?
So right now, they're already inside the application Hornet perks, but they're just points within the application. And so they can only be redeemed for a subscription or for like swag, like a t-shirt with the logo, etc. If they're going to be converted into tokens, so they can be actually, they're cash. You can take them onto Coinbase or Binance and sell it.
Do you actually have the second point already covered? Because, you know,
what is the second point, sorry?
Because the fact that you have a token doesn't mean that it will be on Coinbase or that it will be.
So yeah, so that's a very nice question, thank you. So OST is Open Simple Token. When we started in 2017, people had a response of like, it's really easy to make an ERC20 contract, and it's true. But doing a legally compliant ICO isn't. Making the software that is needed to really integrate it into a mainstream application isn't. And so the purpose that OST as a token serves is that it's a white label token. And so all these tokens are rebranding of the same underlying token. And then later strategies will diversify that basket that underlies the LGBT token. But right now, OST, you can repackage it as so you have to stake OST, which is on Binance and other exchanges, in order to mint LGBT token. So it's a wrapping contract into the new token.
Thank you for a great presentation. My question is, has LGBT token or LGBT, the app, like what are some of the metrics the companies share with you in terms of what they want to achieve with the token? Is it up in terms of adoptions and other metrics?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I guess I was curious as to what kind of metrics the app, the corporate client was interested in tracking, and what would they consider to be success in terms of for the LGBT token?
So we have a success implementation team, which I'm not part of. I mean, we have those metrics, but for us, I think the first metric would be to see 3,000 people in the first phase of the pilot come online on Ethereum. For the user right now, the expectation is that nothing would change. They're already using Hornet perks as is, and they redeem it within the internal shop. And so for them, we're not expecting that they would notice a lot of change, because they will presumably be doing the same thing. What we are working towards with this project, though, is that it's not called Hornet token, it's called LGBT token. And so it's specifically set up with a foundation, and Hornet is the first application for it to become a payment method across any provider, just as an awareness-raising project for the community as well, to have their own token to pay for. But that's future work. That's not where we are today. I hope that half answered. I don't have specific numbers in my mind.
It's helpful,
right now.
thank you.
How do you guys manage the value of the tokens as far as stablecoin or other?
OST we don't manage. We launch the ICO and it's just on the exchanges.
How does that impact the LGBT?
So that is a legitimate question. So there is a potential for volatility, which is a user experience problem. And so how we want to address that is by not just staking OST against LGBT token, but having a basket of different assets. Then the problem is, of course, that today there aren't a lot of Ethereum tokens that have negative correlation. They tend to all go up or all go down. And so that doesn't help much with the volatility reduction. So we are looking at the more reliable stable coins to put into this basket. And then also there are established normal financial techniques around rebalancing the volatility of a diverse basket asset. So those are things that we are addressing, but they're later down the pipeline. But it's a legitimate UX question that people shouldn't be exposed to the volatility in the early phase, and so we need to address that also. Yes.
So do you see any caching solutions that would replace the sidechain like challenge here in terms of the scaling? Like let's see a new hybrid app wants to get done now. Mm-hmm. Instead of building a new sidechain that's like a huge hurdle, is there any caching solution that would, I mean, like from the traditional web, that would be the classic solution to...
In what sense do you mean a caching solution? So for example, within the relaying service, we obviously put a lot of effort into giving 10 millisecond responses back to the SDK, right? So one mechanism that we use, obviously we have a full database of all the records so that if there's any query, we don't go directly to the node, we just query our own databases. But also if a payment comes in, for example, then we do pessimistic caching. So we will keep track of what payments we've already seen and then assess where it's like 99.9% likely that this payment will go through given the balance and all the messages that we've seen so far, and then already respond positive to the SDK so that there's an almost instant response. If we are 99% confident, we will respond yes, and then that liability we just cover as a business.
So basically you're already using caching then. So why would you need, let's say, a sidechain? Do you expect that much traffic to...
Yeah. I mean, right now, like the 3,000 people won't cause that much traffic. We could probably put them on Ethereum mainnet. But the idea is very much, I mean, as I sort of introduced, the idea is here to scale. We really want to get to millions of people worldwide. Yeah.
Last question, how would you measure the threshold? Let's say from what point is like a sidechain needed? Like,
it's an interesting question. I think there's, again, I will concede, I think this first pilot probably could live on Ethereum mainnet. The only downside would be that the costs for that would be a lot higher. And so specifically, I think if we go back to the contracts that we deploy for every user, here we already use the proxy model, right? So we deploy master copies for the 3 contracts, and then use a factory if there's a new user to deploy proxy contracts for the factory. Because otherwise, it would, even on the sidechain, be entirely out of reach to pay for a new user being deployed. But even that, I don't think we could do on Ethereum mainnet, not even for thousands of users. It would already legitimately get concerns that we would be polluting the state of the sidechain, of mainnet so much, I think. Yeah. Thank you.
The last question. Does the token have another utility besides rewarding engagement?
So, as is clear from sort of hopefully the talk, is that we're building all the infrastructure to be a full payment solution and a full programmable money solution, right? But there's also legal concerns, and so right now we make the application very strongly towards these loyalty use cases, because then when they're internally redeemed inside the application, the legal concerns around KYC, money laundering, payments, money transmitting licenses, other license requirements in different regions are a lot of work. But we're also working on that. We're applying for all the relevant licenses in different regions in the world. We have legal teams in the different regions of the world, and we're also building out a network for regulatory exchange providers so that users can actually get to fiat in a click if they would want to. But all these things take time and effort, and so we're building out first with very easily complying solutions. If it has multi-usage?
Why the token has a value if it has only one usage right now is to reward the users for their engagements.
There's two fundamental usages to the tokens. One is to lock it up on Ethereum mainnet to mint the new token, like LGBT token and others. And then these economies should have a proper velocity, right? Like initially, the velocity of the rewards program here within Hornet is going to be rather small, but other partners that we work with will have a much higher velocity. So I don't see that the velocity is an issue. The second use for the token is also that it functions as the base token on the sidechain. So we had to build a layer 2 scaling solution, and the OST on mainnet becomes the base token on the sidechain to pay for the gas of the transactions as well. All right, thank you very much. I'm still around here, so if you have more questions.